everybody, I'm Sam Hua, and it's my pleasure to share my book, Sun Tzu's Art of War, a Modern Exposition with you. My book was published in China 2015 and then published in Korea, Thailand, and UK. The total sales exceeded 1 million copies, so it's the international bestseller. There are two major books written on warfare. One of them is Art of War by Sun Tzu, and the other is On War by 18th century Prussian strategist Karl von Clausewitz. Even though On War was written 2,700 years after war, Liddell Hart, a modern British military theorist, said, compared to Art of War, On War is dated. This is Art of War's position in the history of military theory. The topic of my talk today is the basic logic of Art of War's 13 chapters. Yes, there are 13 chapters in the book. And like most books on warfare, strategy is covered first, which is followed by tactics and skills. The first 4 chapters deal with the principles of strategy. Chapters 5 to 7 cover the principles of tactics, and 8 to 11 focus on different terrains and the technical points of marching, camping, scouting, and so on. Chapter 12 deals with the use of fire as a weapon, and the last one, Chapter 13, the use of spies. I've summed up the idea of Sun Tzu's book in one sentence. Master your own business and you will never lose. Sound like chicken soup of the soul, doesn't it? But this is Sun Tzu's Art of War. Shouldn't the focus be on the battle against enemy and not yourself? That's why I always say that if the whole world understands the art of war, there would be no more wars. The central ideas of art of war can be summarized in 3 parts. Number 1, art of war is not about how to wage a war, but how not to engage in war. Number 2, art of war is not about how to win a war, but how to reinforce yourself against defeat. Number 3, art of war is not about how to win a battle, but the theory of winning before fighting. The first thing Sun Tzu tells you is not to wage war, because once you start, things get out of your control. If you don't start a war, everything will be fine. If you do it, there will be no way to see the light at the end of tunnel. The second thing is that you shouldn't always thinking about defeating the enemy, just like we always want to talk about defeating our competitors in business. In fact, your competition is not something that you can defeat. There's no one that you can beat. Everyone's defeat is their own defeat. Just like Apple and Nokia. Apple didn't beat Nokia because it didn't attack Nokia at all. It was Nokia itself that lost due to their own mistakes. If Nokia had not made these mistakes, Apple wouldn't have been able to defeat them. Is it a no aspiration to go undefeated instead of aiming for victory? I don't think so. For example, when Warren Buffett talks about investing, he gives 2 pieces of advice. Rule number 1, don't lose your capital. Rule number 2, follow rule number 1. Since he has been investing for 50 years and hasn't lost his capital every single year, which is a lifetime of being undefeated, the cumulative victory would be large. When you invest in stocks, everyone has caught big bulls or have had huge victories, but often one failure and you would have lost everything. That's why it's important to be undefeated. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share with you my realm of life, which is to be never defeated in our lifetime. That's the real art of war. Now, I will talk specifically about the 13 chapters of Sun Tzu's Art of War. Chapter 1, Ji, Calculations. The first chapter is called Ji in Chinese. Even most Chinese people get the first word wrong in their understanding of Art of War, and the translators are included. They think Ji is just about stratagems, because there's another ancient Chinese book on warfare called 36 Ji, or in English, 36 Stratagems. But they are not really stratagems, they are more like ploys. There are 36 big ideas to deceive your enemy. But in Art of War, Ji means to calculate. This is an issue in the Chinese language, particularly in traditional Chinese. Ji has 3 meanings. One is ideas, second is plans, and the third is calculations. Why do people regard it as ideas? Because everyone wishes to have a great idea, and a book like Art of War may have a lot of great ideas, more than 36. That's why we read it. But the first thing I'd like to share with you is these ideas are not important in Art of War, and I'm not a big fan of the book 36G. I don't like it. As I said just now, Art of War teaches us to avoid wars, not fight in them, because a war has great risks. When we think about waging a war, we must calculate if we can win. If we are sure we will win, we may do it. If we are not sure, don't do it. This is the main idea behind Chapter 1. By the logic, first question, do or not to do. Second, the plan on how to do. And the third is the big idea. By the logic, the big idea is actually quite small. Napoleon also spoke about this calculation, saying that it was a mathematical problem that even Isaac Newton would have struggled with. What would have Sun Tzu's attitude been towards this exceedingly difficult mathematical problem? I think he would have said, since you find this difficult, it proves that the chances of winning are not obvious. If it's not obvious, don't do it. In business, there is a term called risk appetite. Sun Tzu's appetite for risk was very low. Napoleon's appetite for risk, on the other hand, was obviously much higher. Ladies and gentlemen, think about your own risk appetite. My risk appetite is very low. If your risk appetite is low, you will like the book, Sun Tzu's Art of War. If you are a person with a high risk appetite, you don't really need to learn from Art of War. Sun Tzu's calculations. What are the calculations? The calculations make comparisons between us and the enemy in 5 aspects. These 5 aspects are the Tao, the heaven, the geography, the general, and the legal system. First, the Tao. Tao is one of the most important words in Chinese culture. It means the law of things, the moral law. In the book, Sun Tzu only uses 1 sentence to explain the Tao. He said, the Tao is to make people agree with the Lord. This means that if the whole nation supports the war, you have the Tao. So, Tao means unity. There's another saying in Sun Tzu's Art of War. Success comes when leaders and followers share the same goal. Entrepreneurs should learn the first idea of Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is to have the staff and the boss align in one mind. This is the first principle of the art of business. The second is heaven. Heaven is the time, the era, the trend, the international and domestic situation. Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the father of the Chinese nation, had a saying, "The global trends are immense. Those who follow them will prosper. Those who go against them will perish." This is heaven. For me, my heaven is the reform and the opening up of China. Without this heaven, I wouldn't be here, no matter how clever I am, how many great ideas I have, and how familiar I am with Art of War. The third is geography. It's the geographical location and whether it's beneficial to you. Chinese history has southern and northern dynasties, which was formed when the regime in the Central Plains was defeated and fled to the south. The Yangtze River protected them. So, the Yangtze River was their geographical advantage. The fourth are the generals. Generals are people. Look at the commanding generals on both sides of a war and who is better. The fifth is legal system, which is to see if your military law and your military discipline is effective and is about the army's ability to organize, manage, and command. Once you have compared these 5 aspects, you will be able to foresee the victory. I'd like to translate it directly to no-win. In other words, you can calculate beforehand whether you have a chance of winning. But if you don't, you shouldn't force it. Anyone who knows Chinese history and culture knows about the Romans of the Three Kingdoms, Zhuge Liang, who was a role model of Chinese military stratagems. Yet, with all his stratagems, he still lost. And this is a matter of calculation. If you calculate it by the way Sun Tzu talks about, his rival, Sima Yi, outsmarted him. Let's do some calculations and make a comparative analysis of the 3 kingdoms, Wei, Shu, and Wu. First, calculating the Tao. Are the Shu people willing to fight? The group of Liu Bei and Zhuge Liang were only outsiders to the people of Shu, but the people of Shu participated in the war to restore the Han dynasty. It can be said that the local people were not willing to attack, but were simply held hostage by them. Secondly, heaven, the big situation. Wei had a population of over 5,600,000 troops. Wu had over 2 million people and 200,000 troops. Zhuge Liang's Shu had a population of less than 1 million and less than 100,000 troops. The comparison of Wei's strength against Shu was 6-1, which means Shu has no chance of victory at all. Thirdly, geography. Shu was a basin in southwestern China, and to attack Wei in the north, they had to cross the great Qinling Mountains. So how could they get through? In fact, he couldn't cross if Wei was organizing its defenses, for it was much easier to defend than to attack. And this was the outcome of every expedition Zhuge Liang made, he was only fighting for a dream, and it's just a dream. There was never any chance of victory. There was another fundamental problem: food, the calculation of food. Every time he started a war, Zhuge Liang had to prepare 2 or 3 years' worth of grain. And then, when he got there, if he couldn't fight for several months, he had to retreat. Why? Because if he didn't retreat, there would be no food left to come back, and the whole army would starve to death there. Sima Yi, even if he was allowed to have food for as long as he could, he didn't fight and hung up his war banner high. Zhuge Liang even gave him women's clothes to provoke him into fighting. Yet Sima Yi just wouldn't fight. In the end, at the Wuzhangyuan plain, Sima Yi still hung up his banner, and Zhuge Liang died of depression in his camp. Let's see the video.
看来需羞辱司马懿一番，激他出战。仲达即为都督，统领中原之众，不思披坚执锐，以决雌雄，甘愿死守土巢，躲避刀剑，与妇人有何异哉？
父亲，何故发笑？父亲，
诸葛亮送我女人服侍，以羞辱本都督拒不出战。
诸葛亮竟敢如此！
来人，为本都督更衣。诸葛亮差你来有何言语啊？
我家丞相曾说，都督若不甘心受辱，就请早日决战。父亲，我等决战！
哎，你回去禀告你家丞相，就说他苦心相送的礼物，我全部收下。
丞相，丞相，丞相，丞相，丞相。
Therefore, the Ji in Sun Tzu's Art of War is not Zhuge Liang's clever ploys, but a calculated strategy, or what we can now call a SWOT analysis. It's calculations of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of us and our competitors. Zhuge Liang, I don't think he's a VIP in Chinese history, and I regard him as a VIP in Chinese culture. He's famous just because of the story of the Three Kingdoms, and the author of the book, Luo Guanzhong, was actually a VIP in history because he built the Chinese culture. To sum up the central idea of the first chapter of Art of War, before fighting, calculate the SWOT analysis of you and your competitors. And if you can't win, don't fight. Therefore, I'd like to say the art of war is primarily the art of peace. The topic of chapter 2 is waging war. But in fact, the whole chapter says nothing about how to fight, but about the cost of war. Sun Tzu said that if you want to send out an army of hundreds and thousands of men, chariots, wagons and so on, and transport food and supplies to the front line hundreds or thousands of kilometers away, there will be a lot of expenses. Therefore, the first chapter says that before starting a war, you must first calculate whether you can win or not. If you are not sure of winning, you shouldn't start a war. In the second chapter, it says that even if you are sure of winning, you do not have to fight because you may not be able to afford the war. The second chapter is still a calculation of the cost of war. War is fought not only with soldiers and weapons, but also with money and food. What does Sun Tzu mean when he says that a wise general tries to rob the enemy of as much grains as possible to eat, and that having one cartload of grain from the enemy is equivalent to 20 carts for himself? This is the cost of transporting goods 500 kilometers across the plains. The cost of each single cart of grain transported is 20 carts. I'd like to tell you about two clever guys. One is Genghis Khan and another is Napoleon Bonaparte. How was Genghis Khan able to fight all the way to Europe? Because he reduced the cost of the transportation of food to zero. The Chinese army was powered by grain, whereas the Mongolian army was nomadic. They didn't eat grain. They feasted on cattle, oxen, sheep, and so on. They could bring their cattle along with them. Their food can march with them and continue to bear new food for them. Genghis Khan cut the cost of the food, whereas Napoleon cut the cost of soldiers' life. Before Napoleon, wars in Europe had nothing to do with the common people. They were king's war, fought by the armies of the nobility, and the soldiers of fortune followed the king's army. And it was expensive to fight in this way. If thousands of soldiers were killed in one battle, they might not be recovered for years. But then, in 1793, the French National Convention issued a decree of universal conscription, which brought a new era of war in Europe, called People's War. A People's War meant that everyone was conscripted. Young men were sent to the battlefield, and the elders, women, and children must work to support the war. This decree turned the whole country into war volunteers and reduced the cost of human life to zero. That's why at the time Napoleon was so proud to say, "Now in Europe, human life is as cheap as dust." The king's side included soldiers of fortune, an aristocratic army, and Napoleon was a revolutionary conscript. The cost of human life is a key factor in war, and it's the same today. Some countries profess military powers, but in fact, they are not strong in anything, except the price of their people's life is cheap. The lunar doesn't care how many his people died. The cost of human life is low because their political system is barbaric. The history of humankind, says historians, is the history of barbarism conquering civilization and then being assimilated by civilization. One of the main reasons civilized nations cannot defeat barbaric nations is the difference in the cost of human life. Sun Tzu's Art of War also has a saying, "If you must live, you can be captured. If you must live and must not die, then you will have to be a slave. In summary, the central idea behind Chapter 2 is the cost of war. If you can win the war but don't have the resources to afford it, then don't do it. Next up, I will talk about Chapter 3, planning your assaults. In Art of War, Sun Tzu always said, don't do it. In Chapter 1, if you couldn't win, don't do it. In Chapter 2, maybe you can win, but you couldn't afford it, don't do it. Now we come to Chapter 3. You will win, and you can afford it. But Sun Tzu said, wait a minute, think, and think. Maybe you can figure out another plan. You can get what you want without waging a war. As you can see, Sun Tzu is really remarkable. Most generals are keen to take part in war since war is their bread and butter. But Art of War is in fact an anti-war book. I always compare Sun Tzu to Confucius because I think they both have benevolence. That's why I like him. At the end of book, chapter 13, he talked about benevolence again. The whole book is about protecting yourself and to be benevolent to the people, including the enemy. Let's start with the famous phrase, victory in 100 battles does not make a good general. A good general captures the enemy without fighting or bloodshed. There's an old Chinese saying, successive victories will bring about downfall of a nation, which was said by Li Ke, who was advisor to the Marquis of Wei 2,400 years ago. One day, the Marquis asked Li Ke, what caused the downfall of Wu Kingdom? Li Ke replied, because Wu won all his wars. The Marquis was surprised. Isn't winning all the wars a good thing? How could the kingdom collapse from this? Li Ke said, war and war and war. The people were very tired. But victory after victory after victory, the king becomes very arrogant. An arrogant king leading tired people, how could he avoid breakdown? This is why victory in 100 battles does not make a good general, because you may lose everything in the next battle. On the other hand, as for victory in 100 battles, why do you need to fight 100 times? Why don't you resolve the problem in just one battle? You fight and fight and fight. You are so brave but stupid. That means the quality of each victory gets less. You are wrong. You shouldn't fight. You should prepare and wait for a big opportunity and resolve everything in one decisive battle. The aim of the war is not to defeat an enemy, but to solve problems. What we want is not to win 100 battles, but to capture the enemy without fighting or bloodshed. And if we must fight, we'd better finish it in one battle. Then, how can we capture the enemy without fighting or bloodshed? Sun Tzu said, the best way is to attack their swords. Secondly, destroy their alliance. If you can't do this, you have to fight their army. And the worst thing is to attack their cities directly, because the cities are well defended, and no matter you win or lose, the cost would be too great. So, because we want to avoid fighting, we focus on their mind and allies. To attack their thoughts, change their mind, and destroy their plan, there's a famous story called Beat the Army at the Banquet. It took place in the Chunqiu and known as the spring and autumn period. The powerful state of Jin was planning to attack Qi. So, in order to find out Qi's situation, the Duke of Jin sent one of his best ministers, Fan Zhao, to Qi. The Duke of Qi held a great banquet to welcome him. After drinking a lot and everyone was having pleasure at the banquet, Fan Zhao said to the Duke of Qi, "My lord, would you please give me the honor to drink from your cup?" The Duke of Qi was very happy at that time, and he ordered his staff, "Of course, give my cup to Mr. Fan." And then Fan Zhao took the cup and drank in one gulp. When the server was about to take the cup back to the Duke, he was stopped by Yan Ying, who was Qi's most famous minister. He ordered the servant, "Throw away this cup and bring the Duke a new one, because dukes and ministers are not allowed to drink from the same cup." When Fan Zhao returned to Jin, he reported to his duke, "Now is not the best time to attack Qi. I tried to disrupt their etiquette. Their duke was unaware, but their ministers saw right through my plan. With such ministers in their state, we'd better avoid waging war now." Ladies and gentlemen, this is the art of war, and is first the art of avoiding a war, and both Yan Ying and Fan Zhao are the artists. To capture the enemy without fighting or bloodshed, allow me to also share a story about Cao Cao. In the time of the Three Kingdoms, when the warlord Zhang Lu in the northwest wanted to make himself king, his advisor Yan Pu said, "No, don't do it. You already have the power of a king. Not even the emperor can touch you. Don't make waves. Everything will be fine. We just wait and watch the situation. If Cao Cao loses his power, you might not worry about becoming a king. You may well challenge to become the emperor. If Cao Cao conquers the whole of China, you have the option to surrender, and at least he will make you a marquis." Zhang Lu listened to his advisor. After several years, Zhang Lu surrendered to Cao Cao. After hearing the story of Zhang Lu, Cao Cao not only made Zhang Lu a marquis, but also Yan Pu. Having been just an advisor, why did Cao Cao make Yan Pu a marquis? This is the art of war. To get the enemy to surrender without fighting. Who is the enemy here? They were the other warlords, the potential enemies. When somebody had ambition to make himself a king, his advisors would recall the story of Yan Pu. By changing his boss's mind, someday Cao Cao would reward him. So it's Cao Cao who used them to attack their boss' thoughts. This is the art of war, or in modern terms, better known as game theory. That's why Art of War is also regarded as the first book on game theory in human history. Now let's travel through time to the end of World War I. The story of the most famous and important economist, John Maynard Keynes. After the victory of the war, Britain and France sought to severely punish Germany. They asked for a great sum of war reparations, regardless of Germany's ability to afford it. Keynes was an official in the British Treasury at that time. He attended the Paris Peace Conference. He strongly objected to punishing Germany. He said, Not only must we not ask Germany to pay reparations, but we must lend money to help them recover their economy, or else a second war will break out. Nobody listened to him, and he published a book called The Economic Consequences of the Peace, and a lot of things he mentioned in the book occurred. That's why, by the end of World War II, all the victors did not ask for war reparations from the defeated, and instead the Marshall Plan was implemented, which was based on Keynes' ideas. Because of the lessons learned from World War I, everyone knew that this was the only way to avoid a new war. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the art of war, which is actually the art of peace. What I just talked about was the number one art in war, which is changing your enemy or potential enemy's mind. This kind of sounds like the famous movie Inception, doesn't it? The Chinese name of the movie is the space where to steal their dreams. Makes sense. Now we talk about number two, focus on their allies, which means disrupt their allegiances. There is a popular stratagem called killing the emissary to disrupt a potential allegiance. This stratagem was so popular that I have two stories to share with you. The first story took place during the Chu-Han contention. Chu and Han were in a war. Both kingdoms wanted Inbu, who at that time was the king of Zhejiang, to join their sides. And they both sent an envoy to Inbu. The envoy of Han, Sui-he, made a deal with Inbu. But before he left for his country, he found something strange about Inbu. Something must happen. And soon the spy reported. Chu kingdom also sent an envoy here, and now he's meeting with Inbu somewhere. Without wasting a second, Sui-he barged into the meeting room, sat down at the head of the table, and scolded, "The king of Zhejiang has already joined Han. What are you doing here?" The Chu envoy was shocked and in his panic. Not knowing what was going on, he tried to flee. Sui-he yelled again, "We can't let him go! Kill it!" Inbu was cornered and he had to decide. So he immediately killed the Chu envoy and joined Han's side. The second story is set during the Han Dynasty, about 300 years after the first story, after Han won by making alliances. This time our story is about Ban Cao, who was the envoy of Han to the western kingdoms. Just like Sui-he, he made a deal with the king of Sansan and found something strange was going on. Now you can probably guess why, right? The Sansan king was fine at first, but suddenly became cold. When Ban Cao inquired, he found out that a Xiongnu mission was coming, and the Sansan king was wavering. Ban Cao had to find a way to help the Sansan king to decide. That night, Ban Cao gathered 36 warriors under his command and raided the Xiongnu embassy, killing the entire Xiongnu delegation. Ban Cao took the Xiongnu envoy's head to Sansan king, who was horrified and shocked. The king couldn't explain to the Xiongnu who slaughtered the whole delegation. So he made up his mind that he was willing to submit to Han Dynasty and send his prince to Chang'an as a hostage. In summary, the main message behind chapter 3 is to win without fighting. And we do this by number 1, changing their mind, and number 2, breaking their alliance. Let's have a review again for the first 3 chapters. Chapter 1 talks about calculating before fighting. If you can win, you may fight. If you can't, don't do it. Chapter 2 talks about calculation again. Calculate the cost, even if you can win. But if the cost is too high, you can't afford, still don't do it. Chapter 3, after calculating twice, you can win and you can afford it. Sun Tzu said, wait a minute, let's see if we can solve a problem without fighting. Moving on to chapter 4, Sun Tzu talks about when we have no choice and we must fight. Win before fighting. You must have won before fighting. No win, no fight. Just wait. The victory is not made by fighting, but waiting. When you fight, it just go to pick up the victory as you pick up a branch on the ground. Sun Tzu said, the good fighters first make themselves invincible and then wait for an opportunity of defeating the enemy. The invincibility lies in our own hands, and the opportunity to defeat the enemy is often presented by the enemy himself. Even the best fighters all over the world are only able to make themselves invincible, but cannot be certain of defeating the enemy. Sun Tzu said, victory is knowable but cannot be achieved, which means that you can know if you will or not win. However, if the odds are not in your favor, you couldn't force any victory. I think this is the law of war. No win first, then go fight. No win, no fight. This is a concept I have a lot of experience and actively apply in the business world. In hua&hua, my company, our largest conference room is called No-Win Room, where we hold our weekly project meeting. As a consulting company, hua&hua provides strategic and market-oriented creative solutions to clients. Every proposal must go through me before being presented to the client, and it's my responsibility to determine if the proposal can win. I am the CWO, Chief Winning Officer of hua&hua, and I make the final judgment during the weekly project meetings. We even have an annual project meeting called No-Win Day on every March 3rd. On this day, all project leaders will report their market strategies for the entire year, and I assess their chances of winning. We even have a slogan that says, on March 3rd every year, no win the whole year. I told my team, it's okay to collect money from clients without providing any services. The worst that could happen is a client losing a small amount of money they pay us. But it's not okay to engage them in a battle where they have slim chances of winning. It's certainly no good to take money without doing any work, but it's still better than doing work that results in losses. This is the principle of hua&hua in our consulting work. Now, returning to the art of war. Sun Tzu said, in war, the victorious strategist only seek battle after the victory has been won, whereas he who is destined to defeat first fights and afterwards looks for victory. Before the victory has been won, you couldn't fight, you must wait. So, waiting is exactly a military operation. in most cases. It's the most important military operation. Clausewitz also figured out this point. He said, I'm probably the first person to suggest waiting as an independent military operation. No, I think he's not. Maybe Sun Tzu is not, because war is such an old art in China. I believe it's Feng Hou, who was a famous general 2,000 years before Sun Tzu. I think he knew it. When we're waiting, what should we do? Just sit here? Now we come to the core secret of the art of war, the highest source of human knowledge. Sun Tzu only wrote 4 words in traditional Chinese: 修道保法. 修道保法. He said, by 修道保法, you can determine the victory or defeat. What is 修道保法? 修 means cultivate. Tao is unity. Bao is also cultivate. And Fa is a legal system. Think back to calculating by the 5 aspects I mentioned earlier in chapter 1. Unity and the legal system are the 2 out of 5. If you can cultivate unity and the legal system, you would be invincible and waiting for your enemy to make mistakes. 修道保法 reminds me of the famous campaign slogan, Make America Great Again, and the slogan of the other side, Stronger Together. Yes, that is 修道保法. That's the art of war. I also recall when I was a child what my mother nagged at me every day. Study hard and day up, which is a very famous Chinglish slogan, means study hard and make progress every day. So, I studied hard and day up, and waited for today's speech, waiting for your applause. Study hard and make progress every day. That's the art of war. That's the art of life, and that's the art of everything. And that's the highest source of human knowledge. It's so simple, so easy, and so boring, just like my speech, right? Because I'm telling the truth, and all the truth is simple and boring. Yes, even Sun Tzu said it's boring. He said, the victorious of a good fighter bring him neither reputation for wisdom nor credit for courage, because he's always winning the easy battles. It seems like everybody can do what he did. There's no story worthy to talk about. That's Sun Tzu himself. He was a person without stories. His only story is he wrote the book and got the king of Wu to appoint him as a general because of the book. After that, there was no more story. We just know that he won several wars, but we don't know how he won. And there's no story worth talking about. But another general of Wu, his colleague, Wu Zixun, who is also one of the most famous generals in Chinese history, had a lot of stories, wisdom and courage, revenge and victorious, and in the end killed by his political enemies. He was so smart. His enemies came to kill him when the king who protected him died. He hid behind the king's body, and when the enemies shoot him, their arrows also hit the king's body. So the new king executed all the shooters. How clever Wu Zixun was. He even took revenge after he died. And how about Sun Tzu? No story. He's a boring guy. We don't even know when he died or how he died. Probably died peacefully in his own bed. In comparing Sun Tzu and Wu Zixu, Sun Tzu was a successful person and Wu Zixu was a hero. As we know, heroes usually means tragedies, like Achilles, Alexander, and Napoleon. Now, coming back to the most important military operation, wait. Let's see what would happen if you couldn't wait. The story of Tang Dynasty, which is the greatest, richest dynasty in China, was destroyed just because the emperor couldn't wait. This happened in the year AD 755, when Tang Dynasty was in its heyday. A powerful general An Lushan rebelled and started his army from Fanyang, today's Beijing, and headed west to take Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Dynasty, which is today's Xi'an. Marching to Chang'an, he had to pass through the most important pass called Tongguan Pass, which the great general of Tang army, Ge Shuhan, already guarding the Tongguan Pass. There's a famous Chinese saying, "One soldier guards the pass, 10,000 couldn't pass." An Lushan was in fact unable to pass through, and Chang'an was safe. What the Emperor Li Longji need to do is just wait. And in a war of rebellion, time was in the emperor's favor, because the longer it dragged on, the most troops from across the country to attend to the king could arrive, and the confidence within the rebel army would be shaken. But the emperor Li Longji couldn't wait. He ordered his general Ge Shuhan, "Don't guard the Tongguan Pass and go out to attack An Lushan." Ge Shuhan said no. An Lushan had prepared for the war for more than 10 years, but the government forces had not seen war for generations. If we leave the pass and fight the enemy in the field, we are bound to fail miserably. And if we lost Tongguan Pass, we would lose our capital Chang'an. The Emperor Li Longji gave Ge Shuhan two choices. A. You attack An Lushan and kill him. No. B. I execute you. No. Ge Shuhan was sorrowful and despaired. He wailed aloud and led his army to set out. After the battle, the entire army was wiped out, and Ge Shuhan surrendered to An Lushan. Without the protection of Tongguan Pass, it lost its geographical advantage. One of the 5 aspects in Chapter 1, Chang'an was impossible to defend. The emperor fled hastily to Shu, which was 800 kilometers away, and China got into a period of war and war and war for 200 years. Just because Li Longji couldn't wait, just because of one mistake made by the emperor, Chinese people had to pay a heavy price, 200 years of misery. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. From the best to worst, we just need one mistake. From wisdom to foolishness, only in a moment. Big shots decide the fate of billions of people, but they are sometimes foolish. Now the question, why Li Longji couldn't wait? He went against Sun Tzu's art of war. His generals knew he couldn't win, but he wanted to force a victory. Was the reason he didn't know the art of war? I'd like to analyze it by looking at three things: resentment, impatience, and arrogance. He resented An Lushan and wanted to kill him. He was impatient. He couldn't bear to wait. He was arrogant. He wanted to save his face. For him, it's nothing about strategy, but emotion, the weakness of human nature. Our enemy is not our enemy, but the weakness of our human nature. We are fighting against ourselves, fighting to save face. On the other hand, An Lushan didn't defeat Li Longji, but Li Longji defeated himself. I'd like to share with you a very important point: wisdom in negative thinking. People always tend to be positive, but negativity is real wisdom. Don't ask for the best, just ensure the least worst outcome. No matter in war, nor politics, or your relationship with your partners. Don't ask for the best, just be content with the least worst. In investment, we have downside protection, which is a way for us to avoid financial loss. Li Longji's downside protection was his city's capital, but he sought to kill An Lushan immediately, and that's why he lost his capital in the end. Remember to be negative. Just like a COVID test, negative is good. Here, I've finished the main thinking of Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is the art of preventing war. Now we come to the next chapter of the book, which is the art of fighting war. I will talk about it briefly. The topic of chapter 5 is potential energy, and chapter 6 is strengths and weaknesses. You can think it as that physical terminology, potential energy and kinetic energy. If you couldn't understand it, that means you didn't study hard and did it up. You return everything you learned to your middle school teacher. In physics, we know when a boulder rolled from a hilltop to the foot of the hill, potential energy is converted into kinetic energy. Remember the formula? mgh is equal to the 1/2 mv squared. That's exactly what Sun Tzu said. But of course, he didn't include the physics formula. Sun Tzu said, just as the momentum of a round stone rolled down a mountain thousands of feet in height, it's potential energy. You can picture it as your army is the boulder on the top of the mountain, and the enemies at the foot. When your boulder rolls down, how could they resist? Chapter 5 is about how to make your potential energy strong before fighting, and chapter 6 is about how to make yourself strong and make the enemy expose their weakness by moving yourself and ruling the enemy. I'd like to discuss strengths and weaknesses further in two parts. First, it doesn't just mean that I have strengths and my rival has none, but rather that we both have our own strengths and weaknesses. Second, our strengths are gained by a trade-off for a weakness. What does this mean? Concentrating our forces is often discussed during warfare. Concentration of forces makes us stronger. However, Concentrating forces means taking them from elsewhere and combining them together. Once forces are taken from other places, those places will become weaker. That's why I said our strengths are gained by a trade-off for a weakness. Therefore, strengths and weaknesses are not literally just about strengths and weaknesses, but also about resource allocating. By allocating our resources in an innovative way, we can become stronger. In business terms, which is exactly the famous strategic model called Blue Ocean Strategy. Eliminate, reduce, increase, create, right? I'd like to share two case studies. Both are my clients. The first is Wallace Burger, a very large company with over 25,000 chains in China. As we all know, a burger usually consists of 2 pieces of bread with a piece of meat, 2 pieces of tomatoes, and some lettuce. However, Wallace Burger does not include tomatoes. This elimination is considered as a weakness. By removing tomatoes, Wallace reduced the labor required for cutting them, decreased the space needed in the kitchen, and lowered the investment required for each store. As a result, they became more competitive in terms of price. This is the art of war and the art of avoiding a war. Through this approach, Wallace Burger managed to avoid direct competition with McDonald's and KFC. Another interesting case study is Endo Sushi. When we think of sushi, we usually imagine a piece of sashimi on a rice bowl, right? On the other hand, Endo Sushi serves cooked ingredients. The salmon is cooked and there are no raw ingredients. The reason for this is similar to Wallace Burger's situation. According to the food distribution license in China, the preparation space for raw ingredients must be separated from cooked food. Serving raw ingredients requires a separate license in China. Since Endo Sushi doesn't have raw ingredients, the kitchen space needed can be reduced. As a result, the price has been reduced to only 20 RMB per person. This is the application of strengths and weaknesses in business world, which is Blue Ocean Strategy. Chapter 7, Armed Struggle. Sun Tzu finally got to talking about fighting. As you say, from chapter 1 to 6, there's not really a lot going on about fighting. He only really get into it from chapter 7 onwards. What does fighting depend on? Still energy. But chapter 5 and 6 are about the energy of both armies, and chapter 7 is about the energy of each single soldier and both sides of the enemy, how to equip our soldiers to be full of energy and how to drain the energy of the enemy's soldiers. And the emphasis of fighting is still don't fight. If their soldiers are full of energy, don't fight. We can only fight when their energy is depleted. And there are a lot of stories about how to boost the energy of our soldiers and drain the energy of enemies. So, chapter 5 to 7 is all about energy, energy, and energy. But the energy in chapter 5, 6, and 7 are described with different words in Chinese. The energy in chapter 5 is 势, which is potential energy. The energy in chapter 6 is 识, which is about the strength. For example, a rock is 识, which is strong, and the egg is 虚, it's weak. It's like throwing an egg against a rock. Lastly, the energy in chapter 7 is 气. It's about fighting spirit. A team with fighting spirit will always win against a team without fighting spirit. Let's talk about the application in business operations. What is the source of energy in business? In Chinese, the energy is referred to as qi and carries the meaning of breeze, qi. So, it's stronger than word energy. For me, it's branding and advertising. Therefore, in China, for over 15 years, my advertisements can be seen at major airports in Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and so on. Nothing could stop my advertisement, not even in COVID-19. During the quarantine period in Shanghai last year, Hongqiao Airport was empty, but my contract for advertisements continued. I said, the airport can be empty, but it can't be empty without me. Why? Because I believe that if my advertisements stop, my qi will be cut off, and I will lose my energy, and I can't breathe. In the art of war, it's said to be manage the energy of both ourselves and the competitors. As I mentioned before, we need to keep our energy high and drain our competitors' energy. When my advertisements are present at Hongqiao Airport, as you see, you can see it all over the airport. My team and my clients felt energized every time they passed by. On the other hand, when my competitors and their consumers passed by, they felt disheartened and frustrated. Now that I'm expanding to Singapore, and I have also invested in advertising at Changi Airport, I have taken up all the light boxes at the Terminal 1 and Terminal 3 luggage areas. Maybe you have already seen them. Therefore, standing here today, I feel full of energy. When I breathe, I smell an advertisement in the air. Chapters 8 to 12 are about various kinds of military tactics like marching, different situations, and some skills like attacking by fire. Finally, I'd like to say something about the last chapter, chapter 13, the use of spies. Sun Tzu talked about who could be turned into a spy and how to recruit them. But that's not the point he wanted to say. In the last chapter, he talked about the cost of war again. He said, every day that the war lasts, we're incurring huge losses, and the intelligence provided by the spy may end the war early. So he talked about money again. He said, you should give the spy as much money as possible. If you are stingy to give the spy money, you are merciless, you are not benevolent. In conclusion, the art of war is about benevolence. That's the morality of Confucius and also the morality of Sun Tzu. That's why I said the art of war is the art of peace. If the whole world understands the art of war, there would be no more wars. Thank you very much.